Steven Barrett, thank you so much for joining me. This is VoteWatch's Freedom of Speech Hour, where we pretty much talk about whatever it is that we want and we care about. And one thing this week that's really been getting my goat is my petition about Sadiq Khan and the fact he might be getting a knighthood. But I've heard that you've got an even better story that you want to dive into. So go on. What is your topic for today?
Well, I want to buck the trend of the Alistair Campbell created world that we live in, where we only talk about the 24-hour media cycle. And I want to remind everybody that there was a really awful thing that happened with Allison Pearson and non-crime hate incidents, and that none of it is fixed. Because again, it came to a sort of narrative conclusion. And just because Alison's safe doesn't mean the rest of us are safe at all. So I'd really like to return to that. And the idea that maybe stories might last longer than 24 hours and still be important.
Well, just remind everyone who's watching what happened with Allison Pearson and where we ended up, because not everyone will understand. I mean, I've got a bit of it, obviously, well, go on, educate us all.
Well, so there is a desperate lack of clarity. So, and I know Alison and trust her, so I tend to take her version of events. And what we know from Alison is that she was getting ready for Remembrance Sunday, as I suspect you were, I was. My child was laying the wreath for the Royal British Legion locally. So, we're off we were going, getting in our various, making everything nice. And Alison gets a knock at the door. And in her account, there are two officers there. And they tell her that they're investigating her over a tweet that was over a year old, that had been deleted, but that they thought might constitute a non-crime hate incident. Which, I mean, really, for anybody with common sense, the clue is in the name. If it's not a crime, go away, officer. I mean, that is just literally, the basics.
Well, this is the thing about non-crime hate incidents. You and I, through just a nice little jibe with each other, could probably cause a non-crime hate incident. So it's just, this is what our police are spending their time focusing on, instead of getting out there and catching the criminals, the robbers, the burglars, the murderers, the rapists, who actually have been let out early thanks to I mean, it's just mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is, and it empowers lunatics. That's the real problem. Because if I just say, look, you just moved your head in a really aggressive way, and you did that because I'm bisexual. You just moved your hands to me because I'm bisexual. Oh my goodness, you monster!
That's the end of Vote Watch. We're terribly sorry, everyone. I'm going to go into the gulag now.
And this is the problem, that not that I could do that, but that there are people out there who do that. I mean, they lead such, there are people in our society. I mean, it's so funny, Matthew, because when I was little, we had mental health asylums and we locked people up. And maybe we did go too far. But we've really gone the absolute other way, where somebody who is so... Because I think you have to be pretty ill to actually, start making... one of the things, actually, that viewers might find interesting is that... very educated people are often quite prone to mental health problems. It's very, very common. So when I was called up to Oxford, the first speech on the first night, our president warned us about the risks of suicide and said that was now the biggest risk to our lives, because, mental health problems are real. Yeah, he was a lovely, terribly sweet man. He didn't mean it scary. He just meant to look after ourselves. So they do go hand in hand. And I've seen many friends. I mentor young people, and I've had mentees who've had serious mental health issues, but very, very highly academically able, but there were problems of the mind. Those people in those states are now being pandered to by the police. I mean, that's just not healthy. We did have a recurring joke when I was little that people used to believe that they were Napoleon. But this is because people genuinely did go around believing they are Napoleon. Now, those people, that type of person, will still be here because our society is not healthy. It's not fixed. And now they'll just be wasting police time saying, so-and-so looked at me funny because he hates, my skin color or something. It was just nonsense, just making stuff up. And we don't...
And the problem as well is, You've just talked so much about Napoleon. If anyone who's watching is small in height, they could instantly say that's a non-crime hate crime, but thanks to you. I was just looking up some examples. A kid in a classroom said that one of the other students smelt like fish, and that got reported, and that was investigated as a non-crime hate crime. I mean, do we really think these? I am blessed to be slightly younger than you, I think. And I remember my time in school very, very well. You would make jokes. You'd have jibes at each other. It was part of growing up, right? And yes, there was bullying. You knew what bullying was, and you'd call it out for what it was. But saying someone smelt like fish, I mean, maybe they had a tuna sandwich or something. I don't know. Is that a crime? Well, it's not. It's a non-crime, is the point.
Yeah, and it's this ridiculous idea that we can somehow control hate. And it's just got to go. These things are so subjective. I think what's happened, because you're right, I am old, but I've lived through the collapse.
I'm very sorry. You know, that's really offensive of me, actually, to have done that. I do apologise.
Yes.
That's a non-crime hate crime. I'll happily report myself.
Well, actually, I mean, that was a risky one where we both could have done, couldn't it? Because I could have said, I could have meant that I was, who knows? But
I know. Yeah.
When I was little, there was such a thing as collective public morality. And yes, it was a bit odd. So just to be absolutely honest, Matthew, I used to play these computer games as a sort of 12, 13, 14-year-old, or these console games. That, I mean, the graphics are so bad now. I mean, people just wouldn't play them. They're just absolutely horrendous. But you would get sort of moral panics about how this game is going to turn them all into psychopaths, and this game is going to turn them all into psychopaths. So I'm not saying that public morality was always good. It did have still a bit of a moral panic element to it. But at least you sort of had a collective view of what was right and wrong and what was reasonable and not reasonable. And, you know, people didn't play music on trains, and you don't put your feet on the seats, and, you know, you don't spit in the streets, and you don't, and it was there. And all these rules, none of them were laws. They didn't need to be laws. And what's happened since the 90s is the generation above me, because Starmer's quite old. I mean, people forget this, but Starmer's in his 60s. It's ridiculous. But anyway, generation above me got into power, and they hated all that morality. They hated, I mean, they had good reason with people like Mary Whitehouse. She did go too far, and it was a bit, you know, OTT.
Yeah.
And it's quite right. I mean, the irony is that these are the people who got rid of blasphemy laws, and now they're the people talking about bringing blasphemy laws back. But it just goes full circle with these eccentric people. So they hated all of this, and they got rid of it all. They also hated the church, so they got rid of the church, and everything died. And they had one main way of controlling society, which was effectively sarcastic bullying. And you still see it now. You still see individuals in our society who will engage in sarcastic bullying and think that that will win the argument. And I'm afraid by now in 2024, it's just not going to. But anyway, they got rid of all of this public morality. I think it's now obvious we need it back. And law is not a replacement for it. We can't, because you can't really have laws that deal with morality because it's too, you know, iffy.
Yeah.
But what we need to do is discover public morality again and all agree on basic standards and then start enforcing them.
Well, this is a brilliant segue, I think, to talk about public morality and standards in office for our elected politicians. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring to today's conversation was my favourite friend, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, because as you may well know, he is rumoured, we don't know whether it's true or not yet, the Financial Times seem to have leaked it, that he is going to get a knighthood in the New Year's honours list. And you're already shaking your head. I mean, I completely agree. And so this broke earlier last week. And I was sitting in bed reading on Twitter or X or whatever we have to call it now. And I saw this and I thought, this can't be true. No, it can't be true. And I looked and went to the article, and yeah, it seems like it is. So I looked over to my wife and said, can you believe Sadiq Khan's about to get a knighthood, apparently? And we both we both lost our marbles with it. So I decided to start a petition on change.org very quickly, you know, stop Sadiq Khan's knighthood or whatever. A week later, it's just passing 170,000 signatures. It's been viewed over 1.2 million times and has gone around all of London with signatures from every part of London. I mean, from my point of view, this is nothing to do with whether Sadiq Khan's left or socialist or anything to do with his politics, and also nothing to do with his race or ethnicity, which I've had many, many people criticise and allege in the last week. It's 100% to do with how dreadful he's been as a mayor. and his track record. I mean, first question I guess to ask is, do you think he should be a knight, Stephen?
No. No, and he's not the type of person that I would look up to and admire. I think you made some very good basic points, which I make because I'm now I publicly criticise this government, and I make it very clear that I've lived through Labour governments that were nowhere near this bad. Absolutely nowhere near. And it's perfectly possible to have competent Labour governments. This is just an incompetent Labour government, you know. And anybody who I find it hard actually at the moment because I feel I stay friends with people across the spectrum. So I've got mates who vote Labour and who voted Labour all their life, and that's, they love it. I've got a really close friend who, should be on their candidate list in my view, but they won't let him on. But I think they're idiots. But so I'm just not sectarian in that way, and I feel sympathy for them because there's no way. I can tell you one thing about all my mates who vote Labour: there is no way they would take away the winter fuel allowance. No way. So when you see a shill account on Twitter saying, oh, actually, it won't kill that many pensioners, or, oh, actually, the pensioners are really rich. They earn 15,000 a year. It's just like, you must be the lowest of the low. Because I don't know any of my, solid, dyed-in-the-wood, Labour in their veins friends who would write. They would just not say anything, they'll just stay silent. But I know that they're suffering because it's mental. And I think the same with Sadiq Khan. It's got nothing to do with him being Labour. I can think of many people in the Labour Party that I would give knighthoods to and damehoods to. And people who, I think are desperately impressive moral individuals. He is not one of them. And the other point I'd like to make is that I think it's quite funny. So the people, you remember, they've controlled the world for this generation above me. They've controlled it very largely out of the fear of being called racist. Yeah. Okay? So to everybody, let's say I'm a generation above you, because I probably am. Everybody a generation above me is absolutely terrified of being called racist. Not, I think, because they are racists, but I think they're aware that the generation above them probably was racist. I mean, if you mean,
it's a generation. No, you're completely right. It is a generational thing, and this is what I tried to point out about Sadiq Khan. It is nothing to do with his race, his ethnicity, his age, his politics, or anything. It's to do with his track record. I mean, you break down anything that the mayor of London is in charge of, and he's failing. Crime through the roof, transport delayed or on strike, council tax up 71%. But hey, let's spend £6 million renaming the overground lines, which no one asked for. Cycle lanes, LTNs, 20-mile-an-hour zones everywhere. You might as well walk across London instead of get a bus. It's that slow. That's the thing. This is nothing to do with his politics or his colour or his background. It's just him. He has not done what I and others would say deserves a knighthood.
No, he's trashed the place, but they're going to lose this control technique of threatening to call people racist. Because from my generation and below, I grew up in a multi-racial country. There's no way. We all mixed as kids. We all know each other. I mean, people probably know I mentor for a lot of charities. I've done it for 13 years. My young people have been of every background, and it just doesn't. So it doesn't really land with me, and I don't think it'll land with your generation, and I certainly don't think it will land with generations to come. That if you might be called a racist, you have to do something. It's like, no, I'm not racist. I always like to use the example of the ancient Romans. Because the people who are slightly still racially obsessed desperately want to prove that the Emperor Septimius Severus was black. They want to prove that. They want to say that he was definitely black because he was born in Africa Proconsularis, which is modern-day Tunisia, and he may well have been. And they can't because the Romans never wrote it down because the Romans didn't care. What matters is that he was emperor. It didn't matter two figs what his ethnos was. They didn't give a toss. And that's what I think, from my generation on, we just don't care. It just don't. What does it matter?
Do you think that's a big problem that we have in politics now? The fact that Sadiq Khan, the first Muslim mayor of London, Kemi Badenoch, the first black leader of the Conservative Party, all of these sorts of things. Now we've got a state-educated first cabinet in the government. All these sorts of tick boxes. Does it matter, or does your track record? Surely that's what matters. I really don't understand it anymore in politics.
Well, that's what we're going to go back to, because we're all bored of these tick boxes now. Anyway, they've all been ticked. But first incompetent female prime minister has also been ticked. I always like to point out that you cannot just assume that somebody's going to be good at their job because of one of these identity characteristics. And we've been able to prove that. We've got the first incompetent female chancellor. Yay! Hopefully we'll have the first.
Hold on. She's not a chancellor. She's just working in accounts, apparently. You can't say that, Stephen. You're fake news now. It's ridiculous.
But I think it will all return back to substance, largely because that's what society needs, because we're in an age of substance. Don't forget, the 90s was a very interesting time. I always think one of the most important lines from it is from a Radiohead song. And people who didn't live through the 90s don't get this, but they sang this and it resonated. I wish it was the 60s. I wish we could be happy. I wish that something would happen. And then it did with September the 11th, but we won't get into that. But there was a very, very feeling that everything was over, that everything was defeated. All our enemies were defeated. The economies were all doing so well. Everything was absolutely fine. And so politics sort of descended into, well, how can I signal some virtue then? And, let's go and find somebody who's oppressed somewhere and set them free. And that's great. Yeah. But once you've done all of that, then all those dragons are slain. There's nobody left to slay, which is very much that was a problem Stonewall got itself into. It's like everybody accepts us now, so we've got to cut kids. Yeah,
we could spend an entire hour talking about the Stonewall scandal. I mean, it's just look. Final word from me, and then I want to leave it with you, Stephen. I've been making notes of the things that we've been talking about, and the things that come back to me again is that public morality. That sense of a community. I think that's the word. We have lost what it means to have a British identity and a British community. And the fact of having a sense of values that everyone just understands and agrees, and we don't have to write them down. We don't have to enforce them. We don't need to call the police. It's just that look of your mother through the kitchen window as you're playing out in the garden. Well, I mean, no one's playing out in the gardens anyway. They've concreted over all of it. But, I think that's the thing. We've lost our sense of morality as a country. I want to leave the final word with you, but that's what I've taken from this, and I think that's what the problem is.
See, I'm more optimistic. I don't think we have lost it at all, as in everybody who lives outside of London and isn't really wealthy, because some of the people living in London will have it too, by virtue of being not massively wealthy. I don't think we've lost it in the slightest. And I live in a very multiracial, diverse town, and everybody still has exactly the same values. Those young people I've mentored, they have exactly the same values. And I tend to take the view. So people don't know, but one of the things I would celebrate about us is not only did we end the international slave trade, but long before that, we ended the national slave trade. So we said that the air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe. So if a slave comes here, they'll be magically free. Because of the air of England will do that. And I love that. That's how we do that. And I still believe in that. And I think anybody who comes here, it doesn't matter what your background is, where you come from, I think you breathe in the air of England and gradually you'll start queuing. And you'll start doing all of the things which are inherently sort of a little bit English, a little bit British.
That before or after you pay the £12.50 ULEZ charge because the air's so dirty?
Well, what you'll do is complain about ULEZ. Universal complaints about ULEZ.
And you know what else they'll do? They'll sign my petition, and the link will be put below this. Go add your name to the petition. But look, Stephen, absolutely wonderful having you on. Please come on more often. Let's make this a regular thing. I think we need to set this up as a relaxed conversation after a long day at work and just discuss the state of affairs and the fact that the world seems to be going to, and we can maybe be the people to fix it. But look, thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful. And to everyone watching, make sure you like, subscribe, share it, go join our Patreon, and don't forget to sign the signatures on the petition. Thanks, everyone.